I want to tell you about two people, just two people. One of them was a prophet, a man that hundreds of people knelt before every single Sunday. A man who prayed over the sick and watched them get up and walk. A man whose name was known across his city, whose church people drove for hours to attend. He carried fire in his hands. But I need you to understand something today. Not all fire comes from heaven. The second person was a boy, 17 years old, living with his family in Takoradi, a city in Ghana, sleeping in his own bed one Tuesday night, and gone by morning. Not dead, his body was never found. There was no accident, no sign of struggle. His shoes were still at the door. His phone was still on his bedside table. He was simply gone. And then 7 years later, he walked back through the front door. But the people who loved him, the mother who had set his plate at the dinner table every single night, hoping he would come back, they quickly realized that the boy who came back through that door was not the same boy who had left. Stay with me today, because what these two people saw, what they did, what was done to them, I am going to tell you everything. I want you to understand who this man was before everything changed, because as easy as it is to judge a story like this from the outside, put yourself in his shoes for a moment, just for a moment. He was born in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe, third son of a Pentecostal deacon. He did not choose the church. The church was simply the air he breathed from the day he was born. As many of us know, when you are raised in something that deeply, it becomes your entire identity, your entire world. By the time he was 32 years old, he had his own congregation. Small at first, 40 people meeting under a zinc roof at the edge of the city. Nothing impressive on the outside, but something was happening inside that room every Sunday that people could not explain. When this man prayed, things happened. When he laid his hands on people, they wept without knowing why. Women who had been barren for years came back months later with swollen stomach and tears of joy. Men who had carried shame and debt for decades walked out of his church standing straighter than they had in years. As you can see, this was not an ordinary man, or at least that is what everyone believed. The congregation grew. 40 became 200. 200 became 800. By the time he was 40 years old, Prophet Edward, that is what we will call him, had over 3,000 members. He had a car, he had a house, he had a wife who believed in him with everything she had. He had built something real, something that thousands of people depended on. He had everything. And then, without warning, it stopped working. He could not explain it, and as many of us will do when something we cannot understand begins to happen to us, he told himself it was temporary, that God was testing him, that the breakthrough was coming. But one Sunday, the power was there, and the next Sunday, he stood at that altar and felt absolutely nothing. Like a battery that had quietly drained overnight and left no warning. The healings slowed down, the testimonies dried up, the crowd began to murmur, and a rival prophet 3 streets away was drawing his own members away with signs and wonders that Prophet Edward could no longer match. Imagine if you were in him in that moment. Imagine everything you've built, everything that gave your life meaning, beginning to slip through your fingers, and you cannot stop it no matter how hard you try. He prayed, he fasted. He locked himself in his private room and cried out to God until his voice gave out completely. But nothing came back, just silence. And as much as he tried, as desperate as those prayers were, that silence did not break. It was in that silence, that long, humiliating, frightening silence, that someone came to him. He was not looking for darkness. That is the first thing he said to me when he sat down. He looked me in the eye and said, I was not looking for it. It came and found me. Now, the man who came to him was not a stranger. He was a fellow prophet, older, respected in certain circles. Someone Prophet Edward had known for years. He only called him Senior. You see, Senior came to his office one evening after service, sat down across from him, looked at him for a long, quiet moment. The way someone looks at you when they already know what you are going through without you saying a word. And then he said, I can see you are dry. I know exactly what you are going through. I have been there, and I know how to fix it. And as many of us will do in that moment, Prophet Edward gave the answer every pastor gives. I am trusting God. My breakthrough is coming. Senior smiled slowly. I said those exact same words. He replied, for 3 years. And then I stopped being proud and I went to get what I needed. He told him about the forest, a place deep in the border region, a place whose name has been passed in whispers among certain men for generations, a place where the ground itself is said to be alive with things that have existed there long before any of us were born. He said there was a man in that forest, a very old man, and that this man could give Prophet Edward back everything he had lost and give him more than he had ever had before. Prophet Edward told him no. He went home to his wife. He prayed. He went to sleep. And for the next months, his church continued to empty. That was when he called Senior. They traveled for 2 full days. Prophet Edward told his wife he was attending a prophetic conference in South Africa. He told his associate pastors the same thing. He packed a small bag, met Senior at a bus station before the sun came up, and they began their journey. Now put yourself in his position for just a moment. You are a pastor, a man of God, a man that thousands of people trust with their spiritual lives, and you are on a bus before dawn heading somewhere you have never been to do something you would never confess to a single person in your congregation. As much as he tried to convince himself along that journey that he could still turn back, with every kilometer that passed, turning back felt less and less possible. By the end of the second day, they were somewhere Prophet Edward could not name on any map. No phone signal, no road signs he recognized. And the air, he said, the air itself felt different, heavier, like the atmosphere just before a storm that never actually breaks. They arrived at the forest edge at night, and I want you to picture this, because as much as words can describe what he felt standing at that boundary, I am not sure any words are truly enough. He said it was like standing at a door and knowing without anyone telling you that whatever was on the other side of that door already knew you were there. The old man was waiting for them inside. He could not tell me his age. He said when he tried to look at the man's face directly, his eyes would not hold the image. Like trying to stare directly at the sun, you know it is there, but you cannot look at it fully. The old man spoke in language that Senior seemed to understand, and then turned to Prophet Edward and said, he wants to know what you are offering in return. He said he had brought money, a significant amount of money. The old man laughed. It was the only sound he had made that night that Prophet Edward recognized as something human. He does not want money, Senior said quietly. He wants something from your church. He wanted names, specifically 12 names, 12 members of Prophet Edward's congregation, 12 people who had been faithful, who had given their tithes faithfully, who had prayed in that church from the very beginning. 12 people whose spiritual covering, whose protection would be quietly stripped away and redirected, feeding the power that would flow back to Prophet Edward every time he stood at that altar. Now, Senior was very careful to explain one thing. They would not die. The old man was very specific about that. They would simply begin to suffer in ways that no doctor could explain. Sickness without diagnosis, marriages collapsing without any clear reason, businesses failing overnight after years of success, dreams turning dark and disturbing in ways they could not understand. And Prophet Edward, he would look powerful again. He told me he stood in that forest for a very long time, and as much as everything inside him, every sermon he had ever preached, every prayer he had ever prayed, every person who had ever called him a man of God, as much as all of that was screaming at him to walk away, he never fully understood in that moment that he was making a deal with the devil himself. As most of us would not know, because when darkness comes dressed in the language of opportunity and desperation, it rarely announces itself honestly. And so, he wrote down 12 names. And every single one of those 12 people was sitting in his church that Sunday, hands raised, eyes closed, trusting him completely. He came back from that forest a different man. Within months, the power had returned. The healings came back. The crowds came back. People who had left returned and brought their friends with them. Testimonies filled that church every single Sunday morning. And every single Sunday, Prophet Edward stood at that altar, knowing exactly what those testimonies were costing. He watched those 12 people from the pulpit. He watched a man who had been in perfect health all his life begin to lose weight in ways 3 different doctors could not explain. He watched a young couple whose marriage had been a model sign divorce papers. He watched a woman who had run a successful business for 15 years lose absolutely everything. And every Sunday, he prayed for each of them publicly. He laid his hands on their heads. He commanded their breakthrough with a loud voice. And he knew, as you can see, he knew that his prayer was the very thing holding their suffering in place. Put yourself in the shoes of those 12 people for just one moment. Going to your pastor for prayer, believing in him completely, not knowing, not suspecting that the man laying his hands on your head is the reason you are suffering in the first place. He told me the thing that finally broke him was not guilt. By that point, he had buried the guilt so deep inside himself that he could no longer find it even when he went looking. What broke him was a child. One of the 12 people on his list was a young mother, 26 years old. She had been a faithful member of his church since the very beginning, since the 40 people under a zinc roof. Her daughter, 3 years old, began having seizures that no medical explanation could account for. Night after night, screaming in her sleep about things a 3-year-old child should not be able to describe. And as many of us will do when we feel powerless, this young mother carried that child to the altar every single Sunday for months, placed her in Prophet Edward's arm, begged him to pray, and he prayed every single time. One evening, sitting alone in his car in his own driveway, he broke completely. He said it was not a dramatic moment, no lightning, no vision, just a man sitting in a car in the dark, looking at his own hands and finally fully understanding what those hands has done. He called his senior the next morning. "I want out," he said. Senior was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You knew when you wrote those names that there was no out." I got to meet him because he really wanted to talk to me. This is because he was dying, not from any sickness the doctor had found or named. But he knew, the same way he had known things at the altar in the years when his gift was genuine and real. He simply knew his time was short, and he did not want to leave this world holding all of this inside. He looked at me and he said, "Tell them to be careful who they allow to pray for them. Tell them to watch what a man of God is building and who is suffering around him. Tell them that not every miracle comes from above. Some miracles are paid for by someone else's pain." He died 8 weeks after he told me everything you have just heard. Two stories, two countries, two completely different lives, but connected by one thread. Both of these people crossed a boundary that was never meant to be crossed. One crossed it by choice, driven by fear, by pride, by the desperate need to remain relevant and powerful. One crossed it without ever choosing, taken before he was old enough to know how to protect himself. And both of them, in their own way, are still living with what that crossing cost them. If you have stayed with me until this moment, thank you. I do not share these stories lightly. If this moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have your own story, your own confession, the WhatsApp number to contact us are on your screen and also in the description box.